I'm so honored to be here with all of you tonight and to welcome ACLU National President Deborah Archer. Who joins us from New York City. We very much look forward to her discussion on racial justice, civil rights, and the First Amendment with UH Richardson Law Professor Nicholas McLean. I would be remiss if I did not mention the law school's robust revamping led by Dean Camille Nelson, who has been called away due to the sudden death of her father. Please keep her in your thoughts and prayers. In her absence, we are grateful to be joined by Troy, Dean of Academic Affairs, and most importantly, we would like to give our host for the evening, Mark Davis, who is our community's leading activist on First Amendment rights, a warm round of applause. Also, a big thank you to our Director of Community Engagement, Sergio Alcobilia, who may or may not be here. My name is Salma Yasmin Rizvi, and I'm fortunate to serve as the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii, leading a group of dedicated civil rights warriors, equally matched by the expertise of our service-oriented Board of Directors. The ACLU of Hawaii sits on land that has been stewarded for generations by Native Hawaiians. Native Hawaiians are a distinct indigenous people whose ancestors were the original inhabitants of what is now considered the state of Hawaii. While we work within the federal and state legislature and courts to protect civil liberties and demand greater freedom for all of Hawaii's residents, we also acknowledge that Native Hawaiians have never relinquished their sovereignty or settled their claims with the United States. The ACLU of Hawaii supports and honors the unique rights and voices of Native Hawaiians. We also realize that despite the ethos that tourists experience when they come to our islands, Hawaii is not the racially diverse paradise that some claim. A story. A few years ago, we had a little client we adored. She was a 10-year-old black girl at Honabai Elementary School. She got into a small tiff with schoolmates at the cafeteria about boys. As part of the dispute, she drew a cartoon, used her freedom of expression to convey anger towards her classmate. The classmate's parent then insisted she was a dangerous threat based on the content of the cartoon. The parent forced the assistant principal to call 911. The spineless administration did so and the police arrived. Arrested the little girl for terroristic threatening. Handcuffed her and interrogated her at the police station. The trauma that ensued forced her parents to move off island. And unfortunately, this type of anti-Black racism is far too common across our islands. A 2023 CDC study indicated that more than half of the Black students surveyed in Hawaii reported that they had faced racism in schools, higher education, and other student groups across the state. And Black solidarity on the island is often only performative, but not for the ACLU of Hawaii. In an effort to make the little girl and her family whole, our brave legal director, Wookie Kim, filed a Fourth Amendment lawsuit against the police department. The department had engaged in a false arrest, detaining someone for a drawing, and excessive force, handcuffing a 10-year-old. He also filed a Title VI race discrimination claim against the school and asserted a disability claim as the child had ADHD and used drawing as a coping mechanism. On appeal, our team prevailed in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, fortifying the law. The court stated that no reasonable official could have believed that the level of force employed against the 10-year-old, as alleged in the plaintiff's Second Amendment complaint, namely placing her in adult handcuffs to transfer her to the police station, was necessary. The child was calm and compliant, was questioned in a secluded office surrounded by adults, and did not resist arrest or attempt to flee. And we are grateful that we were able to settle the case for $150,000, helping to heal the family and reminding the community in Hawaii that the ACLU will continue to stand as a watchdog for First Amendment rights and racial justice for years to come. Inequality is the state of not being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. Inequalities can be determined by various factors, including age, origin, gender, disability, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, and class. While these factors alone don't make us unequal, in an unequal system, they can cause inequalities of opportunity. These divisions can be found on the national and state levels, even within communities and even within the nuclear family. As Deborah Archer discusses in her beautiful scholarship, these inequalities can be perpetuated in a subtle manner, as within our essential systems of infrastructure, public transportation, public schools, sewage systems, and more. And the impact of these divisions, no matter how subtle, can have vast impacts across somebody's lifetime. Hawaii itself, unfortunately, is a site of inequality. The systems in place today were designed unequally, resulting in a system that perpetuates racism. These inequalities date back to the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, when 13 businessmen, calling themselves the Committee of Safety, overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, installing themselves as the provisional government. The provisional government was later transformed into the Republic of Hawaii, where strict voting requirements prevented most Native Hawaiians from engaging in the civic process. The suppression of Native Hawaiian cultural practices and the banning of Olelo Hawaii further marginalized Native Hawaiians in their own home and was a form of racial and ancestral oppression. Today, drastic inequalities exist, many of which are tied to the unequal design of the state itself. There is a criminalization of poverty. At least 40% of people in our state jails are houseless. More than 74% of people in our Hawaii jails are legally innocent, unsentenced, stuck in jail merely because they cannot afford bail. People of color are drastically overrepresented in our prisons and our jails, with Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders counting for more than 40% of Hawaii's incarcerated population, despite comprising only 10% of our total population. Not only is the system drastically unfair for those that are incarcerated, but it is also unfair to all of us, the people, the residents of Hawaii, as we pay $307 a day, or $112,000 a year, according to the latest Department of Corrections report, to house one inmate. An inmate that could not afford a $50 bail, for example. Mm-hmm. This is why our policy director, Mandy Fernandez, is pushing for comprehensive bail reform this month, this legislative session. And we are grateful to Representative David Tarnas for introducing our bill that aims to reinforce that those who are innocent and have not been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt should experience the least restrictive conditions, and that bail should be set at an amount that people can afford. In Hawaii, we don't need to spend $1.5 billion of our taxpayer money in a new jail. Mm-hmm. We simply need bail reform to decarcerate the innocent. Thus, we see the ways our unequal systems perpetuate these cycles of inequality and racism. We must open up the conversation to address the inequalities ingrained in Hawaii's systems, especially given what we are seeing happening across the country today. Authoritarianism targets bodies of color first. Recently, Students for Fair Admissions, an organization tied to President Trump, filed a lawsuit against Kamehameha Schools, attacking its policy giving preference to Native Hawaiian students. Kamehameha Schools, however, was created for a specific purpose. As Princess Bishop, after she had witnessed the rapid decline of the Hawaiian population, along with the loss of Hawaiian language and cultural traditions, erected this institution. As such, the school honors the princess's legacy. It is a private fund, and it seeks to uplift the experience of Native Hawaiian children who are disproportionately impacted by systemic inequalities in our public systems. Additionally, we have seen an increase in ICE arrests in Hawaii, with arrests in 2025 quadrupling the number of arrests from 2024. A quarter of all those detained by ICE in Hawaii in 2025 are citizens of Mexico, with citizens of China and Micronesia falling behind in numbers. We cannot turn a blind eye to these efforts to exploit the systemic inequalities and divisions found in Hawaii at the expense of our community members. While systematic inequalities and racism exist here in Hawaii, the history and the culture of Hawaii remind us that we are capable of finding common ground despite our differences. Taking from the legacy of King Kamehameha, the law of the splintered paddle has something powerful to offer. It is enshrined in our Hawaii state constitution as a tradition that values restraint, care, and collective responsibility over imprisonment and banishment of others. So thank you for joining us tonight for this very timely and important conversation. We seek not only to resist what is unjust, but to also build a Hawaii where land and liberation and law are inseparable. Thank you so much.
Aloha mai kākou. Thank you for joining us this evening. On behalf of the faculty and staff here at the Richardson Law School and Dean Camille Nelson, who sends her regards, welcome to Richardson, Hawaii's law school. 50 plus years ago, our law school was founded to address these inequities in the system that plagued Hawaii for decades. The visionaries, along with some of our scrappy law students and faculty, saw the need for developing homegrown leaders to tackle these complex problems we face in our community. Over time, our school has played an outsized role in addressing these larger systemic problems. But there's always more that can be done. It was so heartening to come out into the courtyard and see all of these signs out there from the ACLU thinking, wow, we're coming to this protest, I love it. One of those things we did 20 years ago is we started January term. It's a week in which students take an intensive course taught by internationally recognized experts who can provide insight to our students. From international climate justice lawyers to leaders of the legal academy, brilliant theorists and strategists, we've been able to bring in outstanding colleagues to our islands to inspire us on what possibilities exist for the betterment of all of us. Tonight, we have the honor of listening while one of my extraordinary colleagues engages in conversation with one of those really leading voices and advocates for reimagining the systems we have in place. So first, please allow me to introduce Professor Nicholas McLean, who joined the faculty of Richardson in August 2024. Professor McLean teaches constitutional law, and his scholarship explores, among other things, contemporary issues in constitutional law and public law, with particular emphasis on state constitutionalism. Professor McLean brings a wealth of appellate litigation experience, having served as first deputy solicitor for the state of Hawaii, where his work focused on constitutional litigation in matters involving public health, public safety, and consumer protection. So thank you, Professor McLean. Our featured speaker this evening is, of course, Deborah Archer. Deborah Archer is the president of the ACLU, the first person of color to serve in that role in the organization's history, and a nationally recognized expert on civil liberties, civil rights, and racial justice. She also happens to be a law professor. She is the Margaret V. Hoppin Professor of Law and Faculty Director of the Community Equity Initiative at New York University School of Law. Prior to full-time teaching, Deborah worked as an attorney with the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund Incorporated, where she litigated in the areas of voting rights, employment discrimination, educational equity, and school desegregation. She is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Law Institute. Deborah is also the author of the nationally best-selling book, Dividing Lines: How Transportation Infrastructure Reinforces Racial Inequality. Please join me in giving a round of applause to Professor Deborah.
Professor Archer, it is a true honor and a great privilege to have the chance to engage in conversation at this critical moment and in our nation's history and in the life of the story of public power and the exercise of power in this country and the ways in which there have been efforts to constrain power through civil rights and constitutional rights. And I think that...
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful to be here, and thank you all for coming. I appreciate this full room, and I hope we have a robust conversation, first between the two of us and then with all of you.
Absolutely. And I think in sort of thinking about how to contextualize and set the stage for the conversation, I was reading the ACLU's annual report, and just a few weeks ago, you included in a letter at the start of that report, in your role as president of the ACLU, the following language, and I don't think I can put it any better than you did, but make no mistake, this, you wrote, is a horrifying moment. An administration bent on seizing power is counting on us to be too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too afraid to resist. And in thinking through the demands of the moment on members of the academy, on members of the bar, it seems that two of the things that are particularly demanded by this moment that we are all in are, I think on the one hand, fearless advocacy and sort of passionate work on behalf of communities that are marginalized and otherwise impacted by not just the policies of the past year, but policies that have, as you've so eloquently written in your book, accreted over decades, many decades in some cases, have been reinforced by institutions and infrastructure that's been built over time. And on the one hand, sort of creative and open reimagining of legal structures and legal institutions and how we can conceptualize of the role of law and the potential limitations on all of that. So I think, it occurs to me that in your dual role as head of the ACLU and as president of the ACLU and as a leading member of the Legal Academy, you've, I think, contributed in both respects in some incredibly powerful ways. I think just briefly, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about your
Before you get to the question, can I comment on something that you just said?
Of course,
I think,
please.
It's said all the time, and I think it's important to pause, particularly in this moment, when you talked about fearless advocacy. And I've never stopped anyone for saying that before, but I have to just say that it's not fearless, right? There is fear, there is concern, I feel more at risk than I have ever in my life. The people I care about and love are at risk.
Yes.
And we do it not because we are not afraid, we do it even though we are afraid. Because I feel like we have to, that is our obligation, that is our job. And so, just want to say, when people say, you're fearless, I'm definitely not. I'm not at all. I'm afraid on a daily basis. I'm afraid for our long-term health and stability as a country and as people. But it's because of that fear that I do what I do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I think if you could, perhaps for those members of our audience who are less familiar with your academic work, in particular your recent book, if you could share some thoughts about how you came to the area in which you've become so well known in terms of the effects of transportation infrastructure and the importance of public investment and how that investment is allocated.
Lots of people wonder how I came to transportation based on what I do, and it feels so natural to me that there's such a natural connection. The work that I do and have focused on for quite a long time is about the intersection of race and space, the inequality and injustice that we see at that intersection. And when we're thinking about that work, we often think about kind of the policies and practices that we have put in place that create good communities and quote-unquote bad communities, like redlining and racial zoning, racial covenants, and those types of things. What we don't think about is the physical ways that we have created these communities, the boundaries that we put, the lines that go through those communities that limit access to opportunity and resources and happiness and good health. Transportation is an important one of those piece of that puzzle. White supremacy and racism, I think, is about place in so many ways. White supremacy depends on convincing Black people and other people of color of their social place, and then keeping them in that place. And what better way to keep people in their place socially than to keep them in their place physically, to lock them in, to limit the access to opportunities that they have, the places that they can go, the people that they can see, the resources that they can access. And also, race is an important part of the story of transportation. You can't tell the story of America's Second Reconstruction without talking about the Montgomery bus boycott, or the Freedom Riders, or the protesters that took to the streets and marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Transportation and racial inequality and the fight for equality have been so intertwined. And then finally, I'll say that I think that transportation is important to everything that everybody in this room cares about. There is nothing that you will tell me that you care about that transportation is not critical to. Transportation determines who gets access, who gets locked out, who can enjoy all of the things that we have come to expect as part of living in this country. Transportation infrastructure is the infrastructure of high-quality education, is the infrastructure of economic opportunity, it is the infrastructure of a vibrant, multiracial democracy. And unless we think about transportation infrastructure in that way, we're not going to achieve integrated and high-quality schools, we're not going to achieve economic opportunity, we're not going to do the work of tearing down our carceral system. So that's why I come to transportation infrastructure. I want it to be a part of the conversation for us to get to where we're all fighting to get to.
And I'm curious, as part of the really powerful account that is presented in the book, I think one of the things that is most compelling about the book is the way that it foregrounds and surfaces sort of the individual impacts that transportation policy has had on individuals, and really sort of setting the stakes and the terms for why this is, in so many cases, a matter of life and death. It can have an incredibly important impact on the ground. And I know that the book also talks about your own personal story in terms of how you came to your career as a civil rights attorney and sort of to contextualize your own experience. I wonder if you could say a few words about that, just to sort of introduce yourself and your background.
Sure, I think that's important because I think people have assumptions about who I am and how I got to this role, and that narrative excludes a lot of the pieces of me that are important. I do this work and came to this work because I want to fight for people like me and families like mine and our ability to live with dignity and respect and to enjoy all the rights that we were promised. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. I'm a first-generation American citizen. My parents came to this country believing in democracy and that having faith in our institutions was going to be enough. And instead, they encountered incredible discrimination and challenges because they are Black, because they speak with an accent, because they didn't have the opportunity to go to college. And they face a lot of discrimination, and racism has been an important part of my life. From the very beginning. I grew up in Connecticut, in a city called Hartford, Connecticut. And in the book I talk about this, that Hartford had all the things, all the hallmarks you think about when you think about communities that lack opportunity. And transportation was a part of that narrative, kind of locked us in. We were surrounded by highways that polluted our air. We didn't have sidewalks that we could navigate and buses that would take us to opportunities in the suburbs. My parents were able to save somehow and move us to a nearby, predominantly white suburb called Windsor, Connecticut. When we moved there, we were one of 3 Black families in that community, and the neighbors let us know that we were not wanted as often as they could, very regularly. And I remember waking up, I was about 9 or 10 years old, and we woke up to find that our house had been vandalized and our car had been vandalized, and KKK had been spray painted on the house and the car. And so at that age, my parents had to explain to me and my younger brother what the KKK was, why our neighbors treated us the way they did, why they didn't want us there. And I became terrified to live in the house that my parents had fought so hard to provide for us, to play in our yard. I wouldn't go to the park. I ended up having to live with my grandparents for a while because I was so afraid to be in that community that my parents had worked hard for. And it made me think about not only the racism that meant that my parents were the hardest working people that I know, but they struggled to make ends meet in Connecticut. We often had, I still have memories of wearing my coat inside in the winter because we didn't have heat or hot water, despite the fact that my parents worked really hard. I wanted to understand, but also the racism that would cause people to want to terrorize children playing in the park, or to not share all the resources in the community, to not show houses to my parents. But even more importantly to the work that I do, I wanted to understand the racism that meant we had to leave Hartford, Connecticut, where we felt loved and supported, to go to a white community so that we could feel safe or attend good schools. And all of those things have been a thread in my work. And the book plays into that. You know, I haven't talked about exactly what the book is, and half of you all didn't even think you were coming here to hear about a book. And so you're like, what is going on? So a little bit of background. I wrote this book. And the book is about the way that transportation infrastructure was co-opted post-Jim Crow. It became this post-Jim Crow tool to lock in racial segregation and racial inequality. And so I talk about the ways, I was just talking about this with my class today, I'm teaching a class here as you heard, the way that racism doesn't disappear, it just adapts and evolves. That's its power, right, to change shapes and to find its way into the spaces and the holes that we leave for it. And racism, post-Jim Crow, didn't leave, it found itself into transportation infrastructure as one of the ways to perpetuate and to remain powerful, and the book talks about that.
And I think one of the other themes, I should mention as well, just a point quickly on logistics. My colleagues are going to be sending around, passing around some cue cards and pens. So we very much hope to have an extended period of Q&A in the last 20 to 30 minutes of our talk. And so as you have questions, or if questions come to mind, please pass them to the folks who are going around the halls, and we look forward to including that in the dialogue very much.
And for the person who's collecting the questions, the people who have early questions, they came with those questions, those are always the hardest ones. So shuffle it up a little bit.
And I think just to sort of bridge the work that you're doing in advocacy and the work that the ACLU is doing, and also some of the themes that you delve into in the book. I think one of the recurring themes is the power, but the sort of quite significantly limited power of law and legal institutions to combat systemic inequality, and particularly this sort of facially neutral forms of public disinvestment or investment, and to look at how those can be challenged, both in terms of the burdens of proof and the timing of when decisions are made. There's a line that you include in the book, which is a quote from Robert Moses, which is essentially, once the shovel is in the ground, once the yes, that's completely justified. Once the shovel is in the ground, once the project is underway, it becomes significantly more difficult for the courts to intervene, to stop government action. And I think that's one of the themes that we've seen, not just historically, but in recent years as well, in terms of the perhaps limitations on courts once they're presented with an action that has already happened. And I'm curious, how do you think through those challenges? How do you assess the sort of both the power and potential, but also the limitations on the legal system to redress some of these potential injustices?
Yeah. So first I'm going to talk about what the injustices are that I address in the book pretty quickly. So as I was saying, when we started to see the success of the civil rights movement and traditional tools that we had used for segregation fall, communities, states, localities turned to transportation infrastructure as a more durable, more powerful, more visible tool. And part of that has to do with Robert Moses, who was a significant figure in New York's kind of building the infrastructure of New York City. But he had this philosophy that transportation infrastructure and other infrastructure should go right through Black and brown communities to do what he called kill two birds with one stone. Because you're going to upgrade our transportation infrastructure, but you're going to get rid of what he considered to be unwanted communities, blighted communities. He didn't believe in community participation. He thought these decisions should be top down, and you should go right through the middle of those communities. And he literally went on tour and spread the word, and it picked up around the country. So one example that I talk about in the book is after we saw the decision in Brown versus Board of Education. I know everyone in this room knows Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 Supreme Court decision that said separate educational facilities by race is unconstitutional. Brown signaled the fall of segregation in public education, but also the end of segregation writ large, because it undermined Plessy versus Ferguson. And so people were up in arms, upset that their way of life was going to come to an end. And they made a commitment that they were going to use everything that they could to protect their segregated way of life. And we saw for 2 years what was called massive resistance, where people were showing what they were willing to sacrifice to keep segregation, shutting down schools, making school attendance optional, closing all kinds of other public facilities, engaging in racial violence, intimidation. And it reached a peak in 1956 with the Southern Manifesto. And that was a pledge of over 100 federal legislators that said, we're going to use everything that we can to make sure that segregation remains our way of life. And 2 months later, those same people that signed the Southern Manifesto passed the Interstate Highway Act. And very quickly, it was co-opted to fulfill that purpose. I talk about in the book Birmingham, Alabama. Anyone here from Alabama? So Birmingham was known as Bombingham during this time because as Black folks tried to leave the segregated confines of their community and move into white communities, they turned to the most traditional tool of segregation, which is racial violence, and they would bomb the houses of these Black folks before they had an opportunity to move into them. One of the tools that Birmingham had used was racial zoning laws, which divided the community and said, this zone is for black people, this zone is for white people, this zone is for other people of color, and you can't live in a zone that is not designated for your race. And that was struck down right before the Interstate Highway Act was passed. And Birmingham built the Interstate Highway on the same exact boundaries that used to be the racial zoning boundaries. So they turned invisible boundaries into physical boundaries and destroyed and removed the community. Atlanta did the same thing with I-20. I-20 follows the formerly invisible racial zoning boundaries. And the community went to the mayor of Atlanta and said, we need protection, and we need it to be the highway. And he said, okay. And urban planners said to him, this doesn't even make any sense. From a transportation perspective, we have to make some shifts. And he said, no, I promised the white community that I would protect them, and the highway is going to stay where it is. And it destroyed and uprooted thousands and thousands of black folks. People lost their homes. It destroyed the economic foundation of these communities, right? We all know that our homes are so important to our personal wealth and intergenerational wealth, to the stability of our community. And that was destroyed across the country as the Interstate Highway Act came. But it wasn't enough for us to destroy and divide black communities with highways. We also used the roads. In the same way, we have major roads that were built in ways to remove and divide us. But also, we wanted to make it more difficult to get from black communities to white communities. Anyone from Atlanta? No, good, because I'm going to talk about y'all, because y'all are doing the most, right? Atlanta stays doing the most, and it was true with roads. Atlanta used every opportunity to build its road and street grid in a way that reinforced segregation. They would stop a road in the middle so that it couldn't continue from a black community to a white community. They would abandon the road. If there was a through road, they would stop maintaining one piece of it, so you couldn't drive from the black community to the white community. Atlanta right now did a study about how bad their traffic is. And one of the reasons is all the one-way streets. Because Atlanta has a series of one-way streets that led from the white community to the black community, but would not go in the other directions. They didn't want black people to be able to get to the white community. Atlanta turned through streets into cul-de-sacs and dead ends. And they had something called the Atlanta-Berlin Wall. After a surgeon who graduated from Morehouse College bought a house in a white community, the white community went to the mayor again and said, you gotta stop this, we can't have any more of this. And he built a wall in the middle of the road that connected the black and white community. And that wall stood, and the black community protested. Eventually they burned the wall down. Atlanta rebuilt the wall, and the Klan, in full regalia, guarded the wall day and night. And it was only after the black community went to court they were able to get that torn down. Similar story with public transportation. As you all know, public transportation evolved under this cloud of explicit racism, but now we see that there's also racism through dog whistles, leaning into the narrative of excessive black criminality, and the result is transportation deserts in black and brown communities because of neglect and underinvestment, but also transportation desert in white communities because they want to keep out the black and brown people they believe are using the public transportation. And then finally I talk about sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure, because after we have these highways and roads going through black and brown communities, we didn't think about how the people who live there could navigate their own communities safely and build that infrastructure. So a study showed that in black and brown communities, we don't have connected sidewalks. We don't have usable sidewalks that are all broken up. Or you have a piece of sidewalk and then miles of no sidewalk at all, making it difficult. And rather than responding to that inequality with investment, we respond in the way that we respond to most black and brown communities with policing. And so instead we have an over-enforcement of pedestrian infrastructure. I remind people in the book the story of Michael Brown in Ferguson. Michael Brown lost his life, and that day started with him and a friend trying to navigate their community, walking in the street because Ferguson was notorious for having unwalkable sidewalks, and advocates had been demanding for years that there be an investment. And he was walking in the street because you couldn't walk on the sidewalk, and was stopped by the police to be ticketed for walking in the street, and it ended with him losing his life. And it is a story that repeats around the country, and I talk about other communities where this has happened. And so you might think that given this history, that it wasn't hard to uncover, and that we can see the result of that today in Black and brown communities, that the law would have something to do, that it would be powerful enough to address these issues and these challenges and get us to a point of more equality. Because the language is that flowery and that beautiful. But of course, as a country, we are great with making promises. We are great with grand language, but sorry when it comes to living up to those promises and fulfilling that language. And the same is true in civil rights. So the way that we've interpreted those laws and applied them make them really ineffective at addressing the inequality that we see that is structural. And it's true with the transportation infrastructure. We have the civil rights laws apply after these decisions have been made and the harm has already begun, not before they've been made. We put the burden on the community to prove intent and to prove that something was wrong, as opposed to the burden on the people who have the facts. We are still looking for this smoking gun and this bad apple, when we know that that's not how racism works and manifests today. We don't take account of entrenched inequality that has built up over time. We have this very short window that we're looking at when we're trying to figure out the harm and the resolution. And all this has meant that it's been very hard for us to challenge not only the historical inequality that we see in transportation infrastructure, but the ongoing inequality. This is harm that is being inflicted on communities every day. I have clients that I represent in South Carolina fighting a road that is going to destroy a historic Black community. I represent a community in Baltimore, Maryland, trying to fight with Amtrak and stop them from building a tunnel that is going to destroy 5 historic Black communities. I work with a community in Centerville, Illinois, where they don't have the water infrastructure that they needed, and now every time it rains, the streets flood with raw sewage. Their houses flood with raw sewage. There are feces baked into the wall because they have been neglected time and time again. And I'm finding it's very hard to get the law to do something about it. Salma was talking about needing to have laws and this being a kind of constructive project. We so often think about civil rights and civil liberties as a defensive project, as fighting against bad apples, fighting against the harm, holding people to account for the harm that they've inflicted. But we're missing a piece of the story of the narratives of civil rights, because so much of it is about construction, about us using tools to build a community, to build infrastructure that is going to help lead us to more equality. Not just responding. We want to have just and equitable communities. We have to do the work to build that, to build the structures, to build the systems, and our laws haven't been interpreted or applied in a way that allows us to take those affirmative steps to build what we need. So we're stuck with being on the defensive and fighting against these attacks on our rights, which in the end is necessary, but it's just not enough. It's not going to get us to where we need to be. And I don't even know if I answered your question, because I don't even remember what the question was.
I'm curious as well if you can speak to the ACLU's role in all of this, because I think a lot of the themes in your answer, it certainly seems very relevant to the work of the organization today.
I often say that the work of the ACLU is about bridging the gap between the America that was promised and the America that is. And I think over the last few years, we have come to see just how wide that gap is, and that it continues to grow wider and wider. With the current administration, the ACLU took very seriously everything that Donald Trump promised he would do, because he was quite clear. We took very seriously everything he promised he would do if elected president, everything that was in Project 2025, and we had a plan. Because what they were promised was, I think they said that they were going to flood the zone, right? That it was going to be chaos for us, they were going to overwhelm us. And the best response to disorganized chaos is organized resistance. And so we were ready to go on day one. We had a plan, we had a blueprint. And that meant that on his first day in office, when he signed an executive order trying to ban birthright citizenship, trying to rewrite the Constitution, within 90 minutes we filed litigation challenging that, and it has been frozen by the court since then. When the Supreme Court tried to change the rules in the middle of the game, as we've seen them do time and time again, The ACLU pivoted and we went back to court, and we've been able to make sure that that executive order has not taken effect, and we're going to argue that case in front of the Supreme Court in March, and we should get a decision by June. But since that day, that first day, during his first year in office, we have filed almost 250 legal actions against this administration, challenging every way in which this administration has tried to bend and break our Constitution, to deprive people of the rights for which they are entitled, the way that he has targeted vulnerable populations, immigrants, trans students, Black and brown folks, the way that he has targeted power centers, universities, to bring them down, the legal profession, right? Challenging the integrity and independence not only of the judges that hear the cases, but also on the other side of the bench. The judges can't make decisions unless lawyers bring those cases. And he is trying to limit the ability for civil rights lawyers to bring cases against this administration. He has targeted the media. He has made immigrant communities afraid to live their lives. He is terrorizing the most marginalized and most vulnerable groups. It is a story about a government at war with its people. But we are fighting, we are using everything that the ACLU has. We are holding nothing back because we are in a time of crisis. There's no time to hold back. We are putting everything on the table, using everything we have. We often say that we were built for this. And that means a lot of things. We were built for this because we're an organization that focuses on a waterfront of issues. All of the issues that you have seen targeted by this administration, we have experts who do that. We are built for this because so much of the harm and the work has to happen in the states, and we're an organization that has powerful affiliates in every state, so that means that we are on the front lines of every issue and are able to respond quickly. We are built for this because we're not just a litigation powerhouse. We are focused on narrative change. We are focused on policy and legislative advocacy and change. We are focused on community building and power building. We are focused on making sure that people have the ability to use the power that we have as we the people. And so we are coming at this with everything we have from every angle that we need to. And what I think is not being told by the media is that we are winning, that we are successful, that we did an analysis of the litigation that we have filed. And in the lower courts, we are winning 80% of the time. And that's important because the real way that we can lose this is for people to believe that doesn't make a difference. That you standing up, speaking truth to power, making sure your voices are heard, and fighting every step of the way is not going to make a difference. And it is making a difference. And so we have to be better at spreading the word that we are resisting and it is successful. We're also changing the way we think about success. Right, we certainly want to hold the line. We want to make sure that we deny what this administration is seeking as often as we can, that we get outright wins. But sometimes the winning is in delaying the harm of it, right? Think about that in terms of immigration. Delaying the harm can mean giving that family time to plan. How are they going to take care of those who are left behind? And what kind of network are they establishing wherever it is that they are going to land? So giving time can lessen the harm. We found that true when we were fighting for access to abortion rights. Part of the victory was in delaying these abortion bans for a week or a month or a day, because during that time, more people can access the rights to which they're entitled. It can be lessening the harm, making sure that fewer people are harmed by that. We did that with the Muslim ban in the first administration and doing it in so many ways during this administration. So I think, the bottom line is we are showing up in every way that we can. We've appreciated the support that we have gotten from people from around the country, and we want to make sure that more people are joining us in this fight, that more people are standing up, and that people know that it is making a difference.
Your answer anticipated a number of questions that we received while you were speaking, so this was very responsive to the concerns and questions that we have from the audience. But I think there's a number of questions about which strategies are most effective in the present moment, and how should we be thinking about the potential trade-offs between strategies, different in terms of litigation versus public policy advocacy versus states versus work at the federal level. I wonder if you could speak to that, about how you found sort of the most effective approaches.
Yeah. I want it, just like the administration is everything all at once, they are throwing everything at us, I want our response to be everything all at once. And so at the ACLU, we are doing everything. We are not saying that it's most important that we do litigation, but we're doing litigation. But we think it's important for us to throw everything at the problem. Litigation has a role. It is a great tool to stop immediate harm, right? It is a great tool to get us some relief, but it is not going to get us everything that we need. We have to have a legislative project, or we have to be a constructive project. We are building the infrastructure for more justice. It has to be not just at the federal level, where we're fighting to protect rights and using the tools that we have, but it has to be a state initiative as well. State constitutions are powerful, and we need to use state constitutions to protect rights that are no longer easily protected by the federal constitution. State officials are powerful. We have an initiative at the ACLU called the Firewall for Freedom, where we are working with state officials to understand the power that they have to protect their citizens. We should have learned that lesson, I think, from COVID, where we saw the federal government in the beginning was dropping the ball, was not protecting citizens in the way that they should, and that state and local governments stepped in. And so we want to remind state and local governments the power they have in this moment, and to support them and encourage them to use that power. And it's right, so it's all the things. And I think if we decide that we're only going to use one strategy, we're not going to win. Because all of these tools are important. The power in our communities is incredibly important. People are saying, does it make a difference if I call my legislator? Yes, it does. Does it make a difference if I show up to protest? Yes, it does. It actually makes a difference, and we need to do that and to do that more. I also just want to say that it's important that we're thinking about now, but also important that we think about tomorrow. Lots of people have said to me, what's going to happen when this administration is done and we go back to normal? And I don't think everyone understands there's no normal to go back to. One is so many of the structure, the infrastructure, the organizations, the federal agencies that we relied on in the past, we cannot rely on the future because they're not there. They have been destroyed. They have been gutted. They're not going to be able to just pick back up where they left off. All the people that have been fired are just going to come back. But even more important, what we had before was never enough. It was not good enough to get us to where we needed to be. We deserve far more than that. And so the project has to be envisioning what comes next. And people should be doing that right now. We can't wait until 3 years from now to figure out what comes after this administration. We have to be thinking about that and building that now. So there has to be people that are saying, someone else has got the fire now. They're dealing with the emergencies now. And I'm going to focus on what comes next. I was, again, talking to folks in my class today, and one of my favorite quotes is from the movie Dune, where they say, our plans are measured in centuries. And we have to start thinking about a long-term plan. We're not going to fix everything in 4 years, in 10 years. We are so good at responding to emergencies and crises, but not good at thinking about that long-term plan, of thinking about, fighting for a future that we may never see. Imagining the building blocks to make sure that our children, our children's children, are living the lives that we've dreamed of, in the way that we are living the lives that our ancestors dreamed of. Those who were fighting against slavery could never have imagined in their wildest dreams that we would actually be in a room this racially diverse, and that people would be together, that I would be in this role, right? But they were fighting for that possibility, and they did that every day, even though they couldn't imagine that they would live to see that day. The folks who marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, fighting for voting rights, they could not have imagined that as they took those steps to march over that bridge, that we would see a place where there would be a black man elected as president. They wouldn't imagine that they could see that, but they were willing to fight for that. I have an incredible mentor who says to me very frequently, more frequently today, these days than ever, that we are all standing in the shade of trees we did not plant and drinking from wells we did not dig. So our job is to get up, plant trees, and dig wells, even if we may never enjoy that water and that shade. Y'all got a lot of questions. I'm gonna be quick with the answers.
Well, here's a question that really, I think, follows on from your last answer, and it's, what do you want from us, the members of the audience? What can we do for the ACLU, working in conjunction with the organization?
Yeah. So one of the most important things I think you can do as folks who live here is to support the affiliate in all the ways that you can support the affiliate. I, of course, want folks to give money. This litigation, this challenge, it's expensive, right? The Department of Justice has tens of thousands of lawyers. And so we are fighting against a well-resourced opposition, and we need to have all the resources that we can as well. So, I mean, it's hard to want to say it, but every penny counts. And so if you can support financially the state affiliate or the national, please do. Your time. Everyone can be a part of the circle of human concern. So that means we need lawyers. We need thinkers who can come and be a part of that work, but everyone has something to contribute. We need folks who are artistic and creative, who can come and give those skills. We have a whole team of computer scientists who can help us analyze data in our cases, who can help protect us against the multiple attacks that we receive. I can't remember the number specifically. I was recently told that we get tens of thousands of attempted attacks on our computer systems every month at the ACLU. And we need folks who can help us build systems and to figure out how to better protect ourselves. We need folks who are willing to show up for those protests every time, right? Consistency matters, to show up. So you can sign up for our People Power network of folks. Give your time, give your energy, your creativity. If you're not a lawyer, don't think that we don't need you and don't want you to be a part of this work with us. We need everyone to be a part of that work. But beyond supporting the ACLU, I do want people to show up in all the ways that we know how to show up. Call your legislators. Put the pressure, remind them that they represent you too. Because if we only hear from one side, a different story gets told. We need to hear from everybody. Show up at protests. Make your signs, come out, give 5 minutes, give 5 hours, whatever you have, we'll take it. Write letters, and vote. People think about the importance of voting every 4 years, and we're focused on presidential elections, and they're important. But so much of the harm that we see and have seen over the past several years happens because of who's elected at the state and local level. Think about the book bans in schools, where we are limiting what kids can read and the ideas that they're exposed to, the limitations that are put on teachers. That's not coming from and being implemented by the federal government. It's happening because of who we elected to school board or who we didn't elect because we didn't show up to the school board election. I think, there's all this celebration recently because the water board in Georgia got black representation, and people were like, who cares about the water board? The people who don't have water care about the water board, right? The people who don't have access and connection to the sewer system, they care. And so we need to show up every day for all the elections. That's our responsibility and our obligation. But it also is the most powerful way that we can make change, not waiting every 4 years to show up, but doing it every single day.
And I think that
I love it. Y'all keep clapping.
a number of our questions admit to feelings of despair over the past year, especially due to a number of causes. And I think that I was wondering if you could speak to what gives you hope in your role at the ACLU or as an educator. What do you look to in terms of drawing upon?
I think that despair is so natural, right? How can you get up every day and see what is going on and not feel despair, not feel sadness, not feel concern? And so the importance is to make sure that that despair doesn't turn to inaction, right? To have us feel like it's so overwhelming that there's nothing that we can do. People often say that, you know, that we're going to be okay. We have been through worse, and we will get through this. And it's true, we have been through worse, and we will get through this. But not all of us will be okay. And we have to acknowledge that, and sitting with that, knowing that there are people who are not going to come out of this administration okay, that they're not going to come out of it healthy. They're not going to come out of it in this country. They're not going to come out of it alive, right? We have to acknowledge that harm. And for me, that kind of, it can be overwhelming some days. But there's all this reason to be hopeful all around us. We cannot look at how much we've accomplished and not feel hope. Think about where we started as a country, as people of color, as immigrants, and to see where we are today, to see that what we've all accomplished, gives me hope. We are enjoying the fruits of people who did small acts of resistance every day. We are the legacy of people who fought and led and spoke up and just survived so that we could have an opportunity to live, for some of us, living the really impossible lives that we live. Like, it could not have been imagined that we'd be living those lives. And we are here because they sacrificed and they fought each and every day. They never gave up. And if they did that so that we could have these lives, who are we to say that we're not going to do that for the next generation of folks? It is a blessing, I think, to be alive in this moment, to be reaping the benefits of all of those people who fought and led and survived for us. But it's also a blessing to have the opportunity to do this work, to be a part of this fight when there's such important work to be done. And so that every day I get up and think about it, and it keeps me going. I have two absolutely beautiful, I was going to say babies, but one is 22 and one is 19, and they get really upset that they heard that. And I get hope in fighting for them, right? I want to help build a world that values them in the way that I value them, that sees their beauty in the way that I see their beauty, that wants them to be happy and successful in the way that I want them to be happy and successful. I want to fight so that they don't have to worry about their children the way that I worry about them every time they leave the house. And I want to fight so that they don't have to fight the same fights that I have fought. I get hope from my colleagues at the ACLU who are showing up each and every day. They are exhausted. They are overwhelmed. They did this relentlessly during the first Trump administration. We filed 400 legal actions during the first Trump administration. And then in between that, we had DeSantis and Texas and book bans and transgender bathroom bans and all these things that we were fighting. And we have gone right back now into this second Trump administration. And they are exhausted and they are overwhelmed, but they show up every day with power and commitment to the Constitution, to our rights, and to people and to each other. And I take inspiration from that. And then I'll say I take inspiration, I'm lucky to every year have a new collection of mentors in my students. And my students give me hope, not just because they have powerful beliefs about what is possible and push me in what I believe is possible, but also because they are so creative and relentless. They're going to fight and ensure that we get where we need to go, and to be able to be a part of their lives, be a part of their journey, to help to make sure that they have the tools and experience and knowledge to pick up where we left off and pull us farther and faster than I could have ever imagined. That gives me hope and optimism every day as well.
Professor Archer, thank you so much for your time. I think we are at time up, but I just so appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and to share all of your experience in this.
Thank you, and thank you all for
Can we get one more round of applause for held tonight, I'd like to invite Mark Davis to come to the stage.
Professor McLean, Professor Archer, I think I speak for everybody when I express our appreciation for your thoughtful, inspiring comments. And I also want to express my appreciation to the ACLU and to the law school. These are two organizations that are very vital parts of our community in this day and age. And they've had to do important work. And they've had a big impact on me personally. I actually came out to this place to be an ACLU lawyer. It was 14 years after statehood. ACLU had just opened its very first office in the Alexander Young building. They had hired their first lawyer, executive director, and I was their first law student. And but they did that because it was funded by a civil rights organization that worked in chapters in law schools, and they had heard about this law school being built in a rock quarry out in Manoa Valley, and so they sent me out here to make an original contact. So for me personally, these two organizations have been part of my origin story and part of my life in Hawaii. Their work in this community are profoundly important, and especially in this day and age. The Davis-Levin First Amendment Conference began almost 30 years ago in 1997. We represented a journalist who some of you may remember named Bob Reese. He was a muckraking journalist, and he had little tolerance for official incompetence or injustice. And he also worked part-time for a big advertising agency that was under contract with the state. And he wrote an article highly critical of the cabinet-level officer that was in charge of this contract, which prompted this individual to pick up the phone and get him fired from his position. And so those were in the halcyon days when we thought there was a problem about the state retaliating against the First Amendment activity. And so we filed a lawsuit on his behalf, and it was very highly publicized. And on the first day of trial, they agreed to settle. And he promptly announced that he was going to take some of his settlement proceeds and begin a First Amendment conference in this community and name it after his lawyers. So after Bob passed away, our firm took over the funding of this, what became known as the Davis-Levin First Amendment Conference. And so this was, the idea behind the conference was to examine topics that our community had an appetite to explore. This was before the era of cable news talking heads, and we worked closely with the local ACLU, the national ACLU, and the then president, Nadine Strawson, who held the position that, of course, Deborah Archer now holds. And she helped shape the presentations that evolved over the period of the past years. And we tried to bring speakers to Hawaii and subjects that we thought would engage the people here. We hosted Justice Scalia in his first public appearance after Bush versus Gore, debating Nadine among protest signs and so on. We welcomed Kenneth Starr, who, after he had gone after the Clintons, we brought leaders of the Christian Coalition. We hosted Daniel Ellsberg and his reflections on his life and work. And working with Ben Wiesner, we hosted an interview, the very first interview with Edward Snowden that was broadcast via Skype, remember that, from Russia. And they were all extremely well attended. And the conferences were free or close to it. And they constantly drew robust, engaging audiences. So when I got the phone call from Salma, who reached out and said, hey, let's bring this thing back, we said, okay, we're all in. And so this was kind of the first initiation of maybe the beginning of that process. And we're always looking for renewed collaborations and programs and looking for compelling content that is eager to be explored by this community. Finally, I want to thank all of you for your interest in these issues, for your civic engagement, and for being part of an educational process that one hopes will be the key to resolving many of the conflicts and controversies that you've heard about this evening and we're now facing as a society. Thank you all very much.